How many times does that have to play automatically and have me forget that I put it on? It's so stupid. It's one of those dumb things that I'm like, just give me a sec. Hang on, usual stuff. Hang on. Let me just close this window. Oop, wrong thing. Juggling different mouses, that sort of thing. Take a drink. Calm down. My drink bottle. My Stanley. Okay. Like the power drill. Gosh, you date yourself. You really do date yourself when you do when you make certain references. Ford Fairlane references. My goodness me. Okay. Hello. Now I'm not going to say it. Not going to say it. I will not say that I'm not going to stay around long. I have a lot to do today. However, I have also not gone for a piss, so I will last as long as it takes for me to need to piss. Anyway, so, hello. I just wanted to talk a bit about the TikTok ban, mostly because I think, as usual, despite the thumbnail and all of this requirement to do all of that stupid, like, bullshit, okay. It's quite, okay. I'll talk about the what. I'm trying to put a bit more structure in. But I'll talk about the what in a second, but I'll just sort of preface some of this stuff with some broader, just food for thought. Okay. First of all, in tech law, okay, you're not just dealing with United States federal law, one law, okay? You've got hundreds of laws across the states, between state and federal, all of which are at different stages in this process, okay? You've then got individual international laws that have their own domestic sort of, balances of power and, separations of power and all those sorts of things. Okay. We're dealing with, I've talked about this like a lot, which is that there's a lot of gaps. Okay. It's going to take 10 years to sort of work through it, if not, longer than that, to work through a lot of the like legal side of things. And either way, like it doesn't matter because people sort of don't zoom out and understand that most of it is about, most of it's geopolitical. It is also about money at the end of the day. Like in the United States, if anyone gives a shit about it, it's there's money behind it. Okay, that's rule number one for the United States in particular. Okay, for others it might be more about like geopolitical power. So for the Chinese government, it might be a bit about sort of trying to provoke the United States a bit and fuck with them a bit. Granted, okay. But I think that what you've got to do is, when it comes to something like TikTok, and I think it's really important to keep a level head about your own biases for a start, right? Which is that, like, especially because we've got 80-year-olds how many fucking people in US Congress are like over 80? I mean, it's ridiculous. They don't know what they're doing. It was a farce. The TikTok hearings, right? All tech hearings, if you actually watch them, as I do, I watch them so no one else has to. If you actually watch the whole thing, you'll realize the degree of just incompetence, lack of understanding, and just sheer obsession and sort of moral panic involved with a lot of these. Like, just they don't know what the fuck they're doing, okay? Now, that's not unique to America, okay? Got the same problem here. Little bit better, but we again, a lot of this stuff, a lot of the problems with tech come from the fact that they're headquartered in the United States. Okay. But again, everyone, when you sit and you watch like various people and their takes on an issue that you know a lot about, okay, it's really interesting to look at culture wars issues or arguments, or sort of especially media figures who have sort of made a living on being independent journalists or mainstream media. You kind of get when you are an expert in something and you know a lot about a certain thing. I would not say that I'm necessarily an expert on TikTok. Okay, I have a love-hate relationship with TikTok, depending on which hat I'm wearing. As a user experience sort of person, as a tech person, as a product person, I'm both impressed by it, but also find it unethical. I don't think that particular level of sort of frictionless experience is healthy based on a bunch of other things. However, now I'm not going to like go over old ground on TikTok, but the evidence with regard to sort of mental health, addiction, all those other things, right? That's mixed, okay? And that is not unique to TikTok, okay? TikTok has some jet fuel poured on it, but a lot of it is more about, if you actually listen to Gen Z and you pass it with the data, they're somewhat evolved. They're different to us, okay? It's not new for them. It is just life, okay? They've learned to filter out a lot of the noise. Now, not everyone, okay? Much like anything, any kind of, food, anything that involves some sort of regulatory process. There's lots of complex things that lead to addiction, especially behavioral ones, getting rid of this whole, Tristan Harris's claim that like TikTok is like heroin. It's like, well, how about you deal with the actual fucking opioid crisis and all of those things before you start using the similes version, the facsimile. Anyway, side point. Oh, how I told you years ago. I was like, Tristan Harris can go fuck himself. This is one of those times, right? I saw this coming. Anyway, just propaganda. But there's a lot of moving parts to a lot of these things, and I'm going to try to break a lot of it up. But, I've done hundreds of hours of content, and I can do hours and hours on any one slice here. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of different stakeholders. A lot of the a lot of the takeaways that you, come away from this debate with, the position that you have very much depends on which part you focus on. So what slice you know, what angle you take, whose perspective you use, what fucking theoretical framework you look at it from. Like a lot of these things are, it really depends on what your discipline is, you know, how you view something like TikTok. Like I said, as a user experience designer, I go, fucking, it's epic. It's an epically, perfectly, amazingly designed, frictionless experience that achieves its goals. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. Okay. So it's great. As a piece of tech, it's fantastic. It's great. As a ethicist, I go, okay, pause a little bit. Maybe we need some friction. Maybe that's, you know, like I tend to sort of fall more in the way that the Chinese regulate that TikTok for children, but that again is mostly because it's not because of authoritarianism or because I want to control information necessarily, even though the dickheads will say that. It is because I think that limiting, as a parent, like limiting time on these things is better for kids, right? In the United States, we're seeing some of those. Again, you can't decouple. What's going on in the United States? It's not necessarily TikTok. And I think I alluded to this, actually, hang on, sorry. So I think I alluded to this in the last stream around how I feel about sort of, you know, my own career, like my own position, my own art, you know, content. I think it's the same thing with things like TikTok, where it's not one thing, it's lots of things, okay? There's a lot of complex history, something that I've dedicated my, you know, the last 5 years full time to sort of diagnosing, writing down, trying to document. You know, it looks like a fucking crazy board most of the time. There's a complex history. I can go back to World War I. I could go back to the first Red Scare and how that sort of, you know, pattern and that moral panic and the first Red Scare, not the one in the 50s, but the first one, where there was this idea around the Soviets. So when the Soviet Revolution occurred, America became extremely, leaders in America, the powerful in America, became extremely paranoid about the fact that the revolution was global and that they would get overthrown. So what they did was they basically came up with this conspiracy theory, okay? It may sound familiar. It might sound familiar. And if you think it's true, then I think it might be a chance to just sort of pull back a little bit and go, you know, maybe look into how these things, you know, kind of, you might be losing it a bit. You might be losing your marbles just a little bit, because they've sort of taken, you know, this idea of global communist revolution as some sort of great big conspiracy. Okay. No, I'm not going to do it. I will maybe later if I've got time. I'll go into a digression about the French Revolution and how the role that conspiracy theories played in pushing the revolution forward. So that fear can actually be, you know, useful depending on how you see it, right? Again, it depends on the lens that you like put these. America has a history, particularly the United States has a very, you can't look at things like TikTok without looking at the history of moral panics in the United States, the culture of fear, okay? Go back and rewatch Bowling for Columbine. There's an old reference, but you know, look at this culture of fear stuff. There's a book called Culture of Fear by Barry Glassner. I'm not sure if it's still available or still in print, but I read that years ago, and this culture of fear permeates America in a way that you can't decouple what's going on around tech with the history of sort of things like televangelism, moral panics, you know, these things, Puritanism, these things that are in the fabric of the political culture of the United States. Now, I won't go into what a political culture is, just what's politics, think about culture, put those together. That's, you know, that's enough. I'm not going to go into detail on what a political culture is, but each country has its own unique sort of combination of factors that lead to a political culture. Australia's political culture, despite sort of edging towards the United States in many, many ways, we don't have a shared political culture because we don't have a shared history. We don't have shared structure, you know, those sorts of things. We have a different culture. Now, and that manifests in different politics, even though they may look the same, okay? We're still different. There's a different disposition. And so, but but the political culture of the United States is very much linked to moral panics. Now, I'm saying that as a neutral thing. Now, there's a very clear moral panic, Red Scare, reminiscent of the first Red Scare, particularly in the United States. Not this, the 50s one, yes, they talk about McCarthyism and all that sort of stuff, but it's more like the first Red Scare, sort of around World War One, where there was this conspiracy theory that the Bolsheviks were stealthily trying to infiltrate America to overthrow the American government. Okay, does this sound familiar? They were using subversive media and subversive, through unions and through various other things. They were, again, it's just like the Russians the Russians are coming to try and subvert and overthrow the United States government. Like, that's a common thing. It's a conspiracy theory that has had legs since the beginning of the United States. Okay, but particularly after World War One. Okay, so you need to understand that context. So the context of this matters. And the history. Now, I'm not going to go into too much history around the geopolitics of China. And again, that's just one part. So the history of moral panics, one part. Okay, so something that's unique to the United States. Again, the United States is not a behemoth either. Different states, what you'll see is that, you've got different states are implementing different laws. So Florida, there's hundreds. Like, when I say, like, I'm not even beginning, it's you can't even begin to scratch the surface on how many laws and policies and bills and court cases and all of those things are happening right now in tech. It is insane. You cannot physically keep up. And anyone who is sort of reporting on this every day, okay, and they're spending not much time reading, okay, so most of their time is spent, say streaming or anything like that, they're missing details, okay? It really, no one person, not even a team of people could really keep up with a lot of what's happening in tech. I dedicate my life and day to a lot of it, and I can't keep up. And I'm pretty superhuman in terms of, my sleep deprivation and my spurginess over this fucking stuff. Okay, so, I am particularly focused. I have a lot of experience in it. And I understand a lot of the different perspectives, and I've dedicated all of my time to this, and I can't keep up. So that's something that you need to understand, is that there's lots of laws that intersect, that depend on like how you look at it. Now, so it's not just about TikTok. So what's happened? This particular law at this point, all the headlines are saying that there's a bill to ban TikTok. Now, that's not exactly, that's a little that's a little hyperbolic. Okay, that's a little bit, they're exaggerating a little bit. What this bill is that it is threatening a ban. But it's also only passed the House of Reps. Okay, so in America, you've got two houses and you've got the president. So the House of Reps is the lower house, much like Australia. You've got the House of Representatives, and then you've got the Senate. Okay, we're modelled on that. Okay, in terms of the way, the federation and that sort of stuff. Federation that's a separate thing. So you've got it's just passed the lower house. Now, lots of bills will pass the lower house without getting through the Senate, or they go through the Senate with amendments. Now, in case you haven't noticed, the United States is going through some shit. Okay? A lot of stuff is struggling to pass. And a lot of the reason that a lot of these things are struggling to pass, as cynical as it sounds, is not about the issue. It's about the interests at play. Now, what we're seeing here is that this is lots and lots of different business interests. Okay, so basically, again, it's only passed the lower house. I don't see that it will pass. It might, okay, it really depends. It may not. It depends. Okay, I think it probably may. Okay, I'm not going to make any predictions on that, because again, it depends on which lens. If I was to look at it cynically and say this is an election year and they need to control every piece of, like this desire to control the flow of information, like most cults do, the cult of Uncle Sam will do whatever it takes to control, like, the flow of information. Okay, so it might have bipartisan support there. It really depends. But when you look at the fact that there's different interests in the United States because of the nature of the polarization in the United States, it may come down the wire, right? It may not it may not, right? So again, it's just one of those things. But then there's also the issue of how it would operate in practice, which I'll get to. So the bill itself, right? Let me just get my notes so I don't miss it. This is dense shit. So it's not a ban per se. Okay. So what it is it's a forced sale. So based on, but it's not even a forced sale of TikTok as such. What it is that it is a bill where, and it's just because, TikTok fall afoul of this, but Telegram does too, and some other tech does as well. Okay. So it's not just TikTok. It's just that, TikTok is sort of in the, it affects other things, right? But this is a bill that is actually under the guise of national security, okay, and trade. So it's actually more about the fact that it is a threat to national security, and what it is doing, it's forcing the sale of any tech company, okay, potentially company. I haven't looked into the details of how that could be read, but any company who has a substantial amount of foreign ownership. However, it's not just a substantial amount of foreign ownership. It needs to be an foreign adversary, and those foreign adversaries are named. Okay, so it's China, Iran, Russia. I can't remember who the other one is. Okay, I know there's, but that's got to go through. Those adversaries need to be named. Like, there's a whole congressional process around this stuff. So again, laws intersect with other laws. Okay, so there's processes and, in theory, checks and balances. So when things are working well, there's checks and balances in place. It's whether they are enforced or executed and how you spin it. And again, depends on the day, who's involved, who, what, why, when, how, which perspective, which theory, which school of thought, which law are you talking about, which case are you talking about. Lots and lots of different things. So anyone who's saying it's one thing is probably either, not, yeah, anyway. So that's a whole other thing. But basically the way that this is being so basically what it is that if there's a foreign adversary with a majority or controlling not majority, substantial, I think it's 20%, if I haven't got it written down, but 20% ownership of the company is foreign adversarial something or other, right? Fucking move on, Taya. That's a detail no one gives a shit about. But you've got to be an adversary, first of all, of which China is a named adversary. Again, that has a whole fucking other set of problems associated with it, but let's just move on. But if they don't, so they need to force the sale of that company to operate in the United States. So what they need to do, ByteDance is currently headquartered in California anyway. Okay, they've actually done a fair amount. With the first storm that happened in sort of 2019, they have actually complied with this, and they broke, again, you've seen this farce in the hearings where it's like, I'm from Singapore, I'm not from China. China and Singapore are different. We are not headquartered in China. We don't give data to the CCP. We have a fucking California office. We comply with all of these things as best we can. Our servers are in the United States. We're using AWS. We don't sell fucking blah, blah, blah. Also, Facebook do the same thing. What? Anyway, we'll get to the what about stuff. Anyway, so, but basically they're like, well, you've got 180 days to sort of force the sale. Now, if that happens, there's that mechanism where that needs to go, there's a congressional process that is involved there, but also there's a right to appeal. They can appeal that process. This is going to be fucking years, right? It's not, again, because it's a TikTok audience, they don't understand that there's more than the last 30 seconds to exist, okay? Like everything before, like the current 30-second slice of information, there's a long past and a long future in this issue, right? Not just the pop-up right in front of you that tells you to call your congressperson. Right? So anyway, there is a whole process there, and there is a process for appeal. Now, the ACLU have said there are potential First Amendment breaches here, not just because of users, but because you good old nugget that corporations have free speech rights. It's great. It's a great system. So that'll go through, like, that's going to take a while unless you get a summary, sort of these expedited things, which I think every one of these things has to be expedited in some way to the Supreme Court where they interpret the Constitution. They're just going to have to do this stuff. It's too many. There's too many of them coming. They're just going to have to go proactively and go, you know what? This is our interpretation. This is a fixed interpretation. Get back to us if you have any more information. I think that that's really what needs to happen. And those processes are happening as well. Now, you've also got other bills. You've got bills around AI. You've got algorithmic transparency, data privacy, antitrust. You have in both, so you've got federal law and state law. Florida has a digital bill of rights that they're putting in front of everybody, okay? And that's I think that actually comes in full. I think that actually passed. It's too many, okay? Then you've got individual lawsuits like the Mr. Calamity, Elon Musk, and his, broken clock being right twice a day kind of lawsuits, and then his legal team completely shitting the bed. We'll move on. But so basically, like I said, there's lots of different issues here. It's not just about TikTok, but this particular bill is, and everyone's just like, oh, they're banning TikTok. It's like, well, not necessarily. Okay. The only real legal way that they can do this is by fining the app stores. So because Apple and Google are headquartered in the United States and are United States, fall under United States jurisdiction, what they're doing is that they are saying either become an American company, okay? So if you're owned by the Chinese, because we don't like the Chinese, we just don't trust them. We think they're a bit shady. That's another red flag. When you start talking about Chinese sort of influence as sneaky, there's a whole sort of history there. There's a whole racial component and racist component to a lot of that stuff. So if you're just sitting there going, well, I have no real evidence for this, but I just don't trust them. I just don't trust them. That's propaganda. Okay, that's not fair. I think you should explore that feeling. Okay, now, because much like over time, much like African Americans have been sort of fused with crime and violence and gangs and stuff like that, right? Muslims have been fused with terrorism. Okay, for example, or that sort of stuff. Okay, or the Chinese have been sort of considered sneaky, right? You got to really explore some of those things, some of those attitudes that you have. Okay, so if you're sitting there going, I just don't trust them, and you're only taking in information where you're like, and it just affirms that, oh, I knew it all along. They're secretly buying up all of the houses that them. They're secretly doing stuff. They're spying. So explore why. If you don't have evidence, okay, if there's evidence, fair enough, you've read actual evidence. But if it's just a gut feeling, you go, all right, there might be some racial shit going on there. You just don't trust them. Moving on. So that, that exploits those moral panics, exploit that emotion. That emotion has been exploited over time in the form of moral panics since fucking forever, okay? Read up on the first Red Scare and the second one and the third and the fourth and the fifth and all of them of all time, okay? Nazi Germany started in a Red Scare, okay? So the reason they targeted the Jews was because the Jews were Marxists, or that also they thought. Bit backwards. Anyway, so we're learning a lot about history today, aren't we? This is part of a broader China trade war. Now, I'm not going to go, this is a lot of fucking history here, okay? So basically, China was closed for some time. China opened itself up to the global market. Then there's this whole theory where basically the thing that keeps the world peaceful, because it's so fucking peaceful right now, it's great, okay? I'm so at ease. Are you feeling at ease? I know I am. I know I'm sleeping great. I'm not worried at all. Everything's fine. But for the most part, okay, despite everything being fucking on the brink, the theory is that things remain relatively stable because there is a interdependence, okay? So, and this is a funny thing where, China kind of did capitalism a little better than the United States, and we're a little bit subversive. sneaky, if you will. They're a bit sneaky, okay? That's what's funny about this stuff. It's like, okay, which part of it is racist? Which part of it isn't? It's like, well, if there's evidence, it's not, you know, you're not. Anyway, okay. So it's a little bit funny. It's a funny story. Okay. So the Chinese opened up their market, did capitalism a bit better than the Americans, made the Americans dependent, turned their greed on themselves, said, here you go. We'll just develop our we'll become a global superpower off the back of your greed because your excessive pathological need for exploitation. We know that what will happen, again, I'm not, it's not a conspiracy, it's just opportunity, right? Why wouldn't you lift your people out of poverty off the back of fucking Americans? I would, okay? But, you know, American corporations, like initially they started moving car factories and all that sort of stuff, you know, with to Mexico, right? And then China showed up and they're like, okay, well, maybe we should do Chinese instead. That's a lot cheaper. I'm going to make our electronics. They make everything. And, you know, we'll just build a trade relationship with them. And what we'll do is we'll set up sweatshops there. Okay, very cheap labor. And the Chinese go, okay, we'll do that. And then they're in a position where Americans are now dependent on the Chinese market. That is where things become interdependent. Okay, now, and that's why embargoes and sanctions and those sorts of things work as a mechanism of peace. That's the history of all of that stuff. So anyway, I am absolutely butchering and summarizing so I can move on to my point without spending 17 years explaining a bunch of fucking shit. Also, I'm bad at details. I need notes for details. And I also don't write down important details like the percentage ownership, but I think it was 20%. So basically what it is, it's a forced sale. But what they can do is, because Apple and App Store and Google, you can still jailbreak your phone and get TikTok, okay? So you've also got other laws around Apple and Google's monopoly on app installation and controlling that experience. So you've got all these other antitrust laws that are happening as well, where so on one hand they're saying, okay, I mean, I think this is a stupid, incoherent law. I don't think it doesn't work. It's just bad policy. However, the idea is that so they're anti-monopoly, but then they are pro-monopoly, and then they'll inflict that monopoly. Anyway, so the way that they will go after foreign adversaries in the form of TikTok in this case, but it could also apply to things like Telegram, is they can force a sale. You have 180 days to sell. Now, that's when things like antitrust can kick in. So the government has to approve any acquisitions, okay? So that means that the government gets oversight on who buys TikTok as well. Okay, so that's a bit fucking fucked and dodgy. Anyway, that's how it should work, but it won't. Okay, so when people are saying, oh, Elon Musk should buy the TikTok or Peter Thiel should do it or whatever, might not get through the SEC, okay, or FTC or whoever the fuck regulates acquisitions, right? Those things are always ongoing as well. But what they can do is fine. So it's more like an effective ban. So basically what they will do is fine Apple and Google out of business effectively, where they will fine them $5,000 per user for as long as they keep the app going. Now, Apple could refuse to pay the fines. Google could refuse to pay the fines. Apple and Google could go to court on behalf of their users and in solidarity with TikTok. I think that would be the right thing for them to do. But because capitalism, I don't know who the fuck is interested in what, and it's very hard to know who's fighting what battle, because they will pretend to support some things and then lobby in the background for others, and all of the money, there's no transparency and all that sort of stuff. Now, the moral panic around TikTok is that the kids are being groomed to the Tide Pod challenge and fucking doing harm, all that sort of stuff. The evidence is not. There's no evidence that for every example of harm, you've got an example of benefit. Okay, it's cherry picking, like, on either side. Okay, the evidence is mixed. Okay, like life. Okay, like anything. Okay, there's upsides, downsides to everything. Okay, you know. You want to vape, but vaping's bad, smoking's bad for you, but I need nicotine to get through I don't, but I need to smoke to get through the day. Good on you. Okay. I'm a functioning alcoholic, but hey, I'm a fucking doctor and I help people. Again, everything has its flip sides, and anybody who's talking in absolutes, often refuses to acknowledge that things are complicated, life is complicated, and also just because you don't like a thing doesn't mean others don't like it, and you should butt the fuck out of their business. So anyway, don't use TikTok then. Stop these moral panics on behalf of the children. The children are again, anyway, I'll move on to that. I'll talk about that in a minute, how algorithms actually work. And why. So one of the narratives around TikTok is that first of all, they're brainwashing the children. Anyone who's brainwashing the children. It's like, no, the children are brainwashing themselves. And also because of various other things. It's not necessarily, there's no plot. There's no evil plot to, this is where you kind of go into conspiracy town a little bit, okay? You can have, actually, you know what? I will talk a little bit about the role that this disinformation, misinformation, and moral panic played in bringing about the French Revolution. And it plays a role, right? Because the same hysteria actually that led to Nazi Germany led to the revolution. Again, it's like a mixed bag. Everything that is remotely interesting in this world is a mixed bag. Oh, hi, Val. Sounds like the same argument points as online chat rooms. Yep. And video and Elvis. I joked on X the other day, yesterday, and I was remembering Oprah's rainbow parties. Remember Oprah when she had that person on who read a fictional book, but only part of the way through for a start. So the book ended with this never happening, but they ran with the narrative. And on Oprah used to spread so much shit. Like, people forget how Oprah made her money, which was spreading bullshit and causing fucking the meat thing. Remember the mad cow thing with the meat? But also the rainbow parties. So basically, I think you'll remember, you might not remember the moral panic or anything around it, but you'll definitely remember the thing. The concept of the rainbow party was that teenage girls were having these orgies, okay, where they'd sit in a circle with different colored lipstick, and men they'd perform oral, and the men would walk around, and the girls would perform oral, and then they'd form a rainbow on their dick, okay? Oprah spread that. Okay, that caused a panic, and sex educators, grown-ass adults, actually did inquiries, and there was a whole thing about that. Oprah's that rainbow party thing, that came from Oprah. Okay. Anyway, so those sorts of things through media are not unusual. Hang on, let me just adjust so I can see hang on. Yeah, okay. So yes, it is. It's a live stream. Live streams tend to be stream of consciousness, but also coming from a place of knowledge. So, anyway, so the rainbow party, right? You're most welcome to go to, great courses or any other place where you'll actually, this is not content. This is a live stream. So, anyway, what was I going to say? They threw me off. Where was I? Oh, the rainbow party. Yeah, so the history of moral panics is one part. But, the thing is, there are actual substantive problems with TikTok, as I've said. There's no evidence that we know of that has been presented that is compelling, okay? At best, the evidence is mixed and based in conjecture. I think everyone can assume that every country is spying on everyone else's country. I mean, we're in the Five Eyes, right? Australia, UK, Canada. I don't know who's the other. Who's the fifth? America. I don't know who anyway, whatever. We're part of that, right? That whole, everyone shares information, okay? One can assume that that data is being shared between that Everyone is spying on everyone else, okay? It's looking into espionage, right? It's not really like rocket science. It's not a leap, right? So it is New Zealand. Okay, yeah. I wasn't sure. I doubted myself because New Zealand is not significant enough in the global, anyway. Anyway, so I thought it was, but yeah, so it is New Zealand. Okay, so we're in the Five Eyes. It's good that we've got a military person here. It's like, this is obvious stuff. There's nothing here that is like, but when you get into it is a conspiracy, okay, now there are conspiracies that exist. Anything where there's 2 or 3 people and you're trying to conceal or, do stuff, that is a conspiracy. But at the same time, when you get into sort of tinfoil hat territory, and ignore, a lot of it is just ignoring how systems function. If you're not focused on root cause and how systems function, such as like capitalism, the history of neoliberalism, how, anti-communism has sort of been pervasive in, American history, like that has to be, and how, obviously how far-right movements rise out of communism, right? Out of communism, out of anti-communism, right? That fear of communism and that culture of fear is the common root cause, common thread, right, throughout history, and also covering up your tracks when it comes to that stuff. So blaming the victim effectively throughout history when you know these things. But what was I saying about TikTok? Oh, yeah. So, the tinfoil hat shit is when you ascribe like a conspiracy to things that are just more, a lot more interesting when it's not a conspiracy. It's a lot more interesting when it's a mixed bag of lots of different things. And so, so when you're talking about things like, I've gone off track. I can't remember. I was trying to get back to my, point. Hang on a sec. Because you have to calculate whether someone's a heckler or not. And you have to sit there sort of wondering if it's going to escalate. Hang on a second. Let me have a look. Hang on. We're ready. Okay. Hang on. Let me just look at my... So I don't want to go into too much detail about the moral panic stuff because, again, it's based on a lot of stuff. But again, it depends on whether you come from sort of media. I'm a political scientist with time in tech. I see it through that lens, through that discipline, and through like sort of history, economics, those sort of more classical disciplines, right? And law, of course. But if you are more of a media studies person, you probably be more into sort of critical reading of the media. And there's a whole school of thought around. I was reading a little bit. I don't know a lot about this. I'm not a media studies person. Really, it's not. I find it a little bit. I find that that stuff is a little pretentious and missing the point, and just not. It's a little too not abstract. It's a little too detached from sort of material reality for me. I prefer more tangible, workable solutions, like in terms of So that's I'm a policy person, right? But things like there's a thing called hypodermic needle theory, where which is something that is pervasive, where this idea that it's top-down idea that you can just feed the public, okay, this is like propaganda studies, this idea that you can just feed the public information via the media and they will just passively take it in and accept it, and that is the single cause. Again, America, single causes rather than a few, and that single cause is never root cause. That's the rules around America. We're going to say that there's a single cause, but it will never be the root cause. So what we will do is say that it's lots and lots of different single causes, rather anything but the actual cause. Okay. But anything other than what the actual truth is, which is that America is fucking, anyway, capitalism, motherfucker. Okay. So, but this idea, it's not that simple. It's really not that simple, right? Which is especially online, especially with Gen Z, where Gen Z, like they focus on the cohort that can't read, or they focus on the cohort that, which again is mostly linked to the lack of the shittiness of, public education in America, poverty. There's lots of other confounding variables that you'd look at before you look at TikTok. Okay. So the way that I would look at these sorts of issues is to look at how tech has added to a problem. It's not necessarily causing a problem. It's usually an additive to an existing problem, such as a lot of the evidence around internet addiction studies, if you believe that there is such a thing as social media addiction, which, again, the evidence is that's being debated in psychology. That's debatable as well. Internet gaming disorder, those sorts of things. If you accept the premise of those at being disorders, okay, again, depending on the lens, you might not think that those things are valid paradigms in which to, do things, okay, which is to make everything a disorder. But if you accept the premise that those disorders are real, the evidence that exists shows that those who have that set of symptoms, okay, already predisposed to other mental disorders. So there's usually coexisting, okay, but also they're already pre-vulnerable. So much like, this idea that people who, with like heroin or falling into addiction or gambling addiction or whatever. Yes, while there is a cohort of people who become, addicted to whatever they're doing, okay. It's usually tracks at about 7 to 10% of anything: alcohol, drugs, gambling, behavioral, any kind of other behavioral substances, right? Food, whatever. But the people of that cohort, those people are already suffering from various other factors, such as poverty, such as other things going on, alienation from, peers, people with ADHD and people on the spectrum who are already socially vulnerable. So they might be feeling isolated. And the internet, like in my case, the internet gave me, I was never I never had real social problems. I just didn't like people, different things. Yeah. So that's the thing. Exactly. So that's the thing. It is really, at the end of the day, we're looking at everything feeds into sort of neoliberal world order stuff, which is not a conspiracy. It is a worldview that has its roots in various, again, it's so fucking stressful and so exhausting, but it's you got to bite it off in small chunks. But anyway, but yeah, that's why I say, if you accept the premise that the DSM and ICD-10 are valid in the first place, which means that there is a critical school of thought around, mental health disorders in the first place, I'm just looking at, we've got to deconstruct these things, okay? Which is, you got to go, okay, well, what's the default mode that we're working from here? You've got to, I do try to keep the jargon there. So it's not that I don't know, it is just that I'm trying to, I'm just working through a lot of things and trying to explain them at here, right? Mostly because of the comedy thing. I'm trying to learn how to set up, do premises, communicate premises and setups to an audience of normal people. So I try to just not go too much into theory. My problem is that I go too much into theory and waffle too much and try to explain it many different ways, and then people get annoyed with fucking stream of consciousness. So, okay. Anyway, but it's not just about TikTok. But also, you got to look critically at these sort of things that people take as a given. And TikTok has so many things, so many premises that are open to question, for a start, which is, first of all, like, the evidence isn't clear that TikTok causes wide-scale mental health. You just accept that premise, right? You also have to accept, there's a lot of things that you have to accept in order for this banning of TikTok to sort of make sense. The Chinese are sneaky. I just don't trust them. The Chinese are sneaky. The Chinese, yeah, it's like, okay, well, that's another premise that you have to accept, that you've got to, you've got to question that and go, okay, well, what are my motivations here? Is it based, again, I'm not saying you're racist. I'm saying you've got to ask yourself the question about what your motivations are, why you're just uncritically accepting the idea that the Chinese are sneaky, okay? Especially when they could actually just purchase that data from data brokers via, it's not like, and also, why would they want it? Why do they want that data? So a lot of it is, oh, that's right. So I was talking about how one of the claims is that, because of the parallel experiences between the Chinese version of TikTok and the American version of TikTok, that, the Chinese have limited, like, again, policies that I would actually largely agree with would probably be quite a good idea for children, which is a matter of legislation, which is something that the people who have all the power to legislate could do, which is to mandate it that children have to have limited time on phones, and that, you could actually limit, again, but, then you come up against the weaknesses, I would say weaknesses of the United States Constitution. Or what you could do is legislate for algorithmic transparency, okay, so that if that data is being shared or manipulated or anything like that, then that's on a ledger. Everyone can see it. You can do that's a better solution, because then everyone has to share their algorithmic, their logic around how these things work. Now, the problem with AI running it is that some of the AI itself is black box. So people don't necessarily, a lot of that causes other problems. With every solution, you create more and more problems. And that's why, making it like some big top-down conspiracy, it's not necessarily that. It is the fact that there is a dominant worldview that has biases and imposes a certain worldview. Now, are some people really fucking evil? Absolutely. Okay. Of course. Okay. But I do like to think that most people just have competing worldviews and different priorities and different personality types and different temperaments, different pain thresholds, different ethical frameworks that they operate from. Okay. Are some more objectively wrong than others? Of course. And do some do a lot more harm than others? Of course. But a lot of things can be, I think a lot of people shouldn't be throwing stones and accusing others without doing severe self-audits. Okay. Because we're all vulnerable to these things. We're all vulnerable to outgrouping. We're all vulnerable to all of these forces. You're not immune from these biases, and neither are our structures. And that's where, anyway. So again, a lot of the evidence around TikTok, they haven't really produced any. So you have to just keep accepting a lot of things that are shorthand, okay, for a whole fuck ton of, it's very loaded. Okay, so cults, like the United States, use loaded language, okay? Like, that was one of the things that I found really interesting when I first started delving into how the US culture wars was affecting the internet from here, right? Which was that I did a political science degree, okay, and legal studies, and I did and then subsequent stuff in policy and law, okay, and I learned certain things, okay. I learned, European history. I learned basically, history of philosophy. All of the different philosophers, all of the different words and, what they mean, the concepts. I knew horseshoe theory was horse shit. Like, it was just one of those things that the Americans sort of did. I had and I did my thesis on comparative systems, and I chose the United States in terms of, how the Bill of Rights impacts the ability to govern. Like, that was, so I know a little more about United States system than most people in the United States, but also, in Australia. And even I underestimated the differences and how this shifting of language has been laundered over time, where words don't mean, we're saying the same words, but we mean different things. They have different subtext, different contexts, different connotations that I was missing Like when people say Marxism or socialism here, it's, well, to the vast majority of sane people, if you say that, it's not as loaded. Okay, so it's just I'm a socialist. Okay, unless you're talking to a fucking cooker who's like been consuming Rebel News and all this other, because media is global now. We've got our 10% of cohorts who are completely cooked in the head as well, and they think they're fighting for their First Amendment rights. It's funny, but for the most part, you can just say, oh yeah, I'm an old commie, I'm a socialist, and it's not loaded. I mean, you'll get people who think you're an idiot, and there's all those stereotypes that go with that. But for the most part, because we've got a strong labour movement and strong history of strong, like we had our anti-communism here, but it didn't, because we've got a history of again, there's a lot of very we've got much like the United States, we had distinct colonies with their own unique sort of histories as well. So Sydney and Melbourne in the eastern states and Western Australia, they were settled differently to places like Queensland and various others. So some of them were convicts, some of them. So, and that's why some of the critical theory from the United States around race and that linear, like, I'm not saying that it becomes a little more complex here. And again, I'm not saying this isn't in the United States as well, but a lot of, because of the way that Australia was like colonized, right? It's not as simple as white people colonizing this place, because a lot of the people who were brought here were the poorest, Irish, they were, impoverished orphans. One day I should talk about Kingsley Fairbridge and the Fairbridge stuff, where a lot of it were orphans were shipped over here, and they were, and I think a lot of their story gets erased by Americanized, dominant discourse around colonialism and imperialism, that sort of stuff. But I try not, I don't walk that line, because it does that's not you got to make calculations about what you can and can't talk about and deliver well and be understood in terms of your intention, right? That's just, there's some things I've realized over, I think maybe I think things can be true and you don't necessarily need to say them, because it would be a dick thing to say. You know what I mean? Like that's just something that I'm, again, I'm probably too old to learn it, but I think a lot of people do need to learn that we live in a society, and that just because you think it doesn't mean that you need to necessarily say it. And just because you know a story or want to tell a story doesn't mean that the timing is right, the context is right, or that it will be received in the way that you intended. I think that when you get serious about comedy or comedy writing, or especially when you're curating a lot of stuff into an act, like there's a lot of jokes I've got where I'm sorting through this stuff. There's a lot of jokes. I have gone on a tangent, but who gives a shit? Part of my charm. But there is something to be said. It's been interesting, actually, because you got to look at not so much in terms of pandering to the audience, like I talked about in the last stream, but you got to think about the timing a lot. And a lot of the stuff that I've written over the years, because I've got, been writing jokes for 20 years. I've been wanting to I've considered myself a comedian since I was a kid. I just never thought that it was a thing that I could do, until recently, when someone's taken me under his wing and decided that I should pursue that, and that's really cool. Having that encouragement helps. But part of that is the discipline of sorting through your jokes, and the process of that has been really interesting, because some of the stuff that I've talked about, I've said, some of those pieces, I need to be established. You need to be established, and people need to know a bit about you before you go saying that, because if they don't know anything about you, could be misunderstood. And I think that that's the same thing like we're talking about with like, you know, you need to understand who I am and what I'm about. You got to be kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like, and again, I don't like really the American style of stand up anyway. Like that, everything just feels like a fucking sales pitch, an elevator pitch. It's like very content. Like there are obviously great American stand-ups, but I tend to lean more towards the UK, where they've got a little more room for nuance and subtlety, and you know, so I'm probably looking more at UK style stuff, where you can meander and do your thing. There, Americans have no tolerance at all, and Australians as well. Australians are like this as well. They're not patient audiences. They need everything in a listicle. They need everything to be delivered in a formula. Okay, that set up punchline. Now, I'm not saying that those formulas don't exist for a reason. Of course, you've got to ultimately have a setup and a punchline, and you've got to have all of these things. But you know, UK, again, generalizing, are generally more forgiving of, you know, let's say more intellectual discourse. Okay. But you know, you don't have to go sort of 5th grade level for everything like you do to, you know, again, America's so big that you find your audience, but I'm just saying in the commercial comedy scene, and I'm specifically talking about sort of that Rogan universe where, you know, they're not particularly, anyway, moving on. Very successful. Not necessarily the most highbrow comedy out there. So, but anyway, so I can't remember what my point was. I fucking went on a tangent. What was it? And let me get my... yeah. So anyway, so it's not so much about TikTok, okay? As such, it's about the fact that there's always a dominant worldview, and that these things are coming into conflict with each other. And honestly, a lot of it comes down to how like algorithms work, and people having this just fundamental lack of understanding around how algorithms work, right? So how they work is usually, now, all things being equal, okay? Now, this is assuming there is no interference. Now, we have to assume that there is government interference in the algorithms. But when they were first designed, okay, it wasn't sinister, okay? From a tech angle, they were designed to scale in a way where it learned what you wanted based on the inputs that you put in. The way that you know, when people just sort of talk about these fuzzy things like, oh, they're taking our data, or they're, you know, this idea of like user-generated data sort of feeding the beast, and then that beast, it's a symbiosis that happens, okay? Now, the kind of symbiosis, whether that's a healthy, unhealthy, exploitative, you know, what type of symbiosis it is, that is debatable, and it depends on the tech, okay? Like, you know, with ChatGPT, for example, or Midjourney, like that's quite a predatory, sort of a very parasitic kind of relationship where they've kind of, you know, vacuumed it all up without our consent and selling it, you know, all of that sort of stuff. Anyways, a whole other thing. I'm staying away from AI because I've got a separate AI thing. But it is all interrelated. But the way that these algorithms were designed, algorithm is a fancy word. People think it's just some sort of magic. They think it's like some magical, again, people just anthropomorphize these things as gods, or as something that's sentient, or something that is magic, with that you tend to overestimate, you tend to attach, make it more superior than it is. Like you make it think that it's better than it is. But these rudimentary Google search style algorithms, okay, is that they just learn from what you put in. They basically learn from inputs. Every algorithm has a database attached to it, okay? All it is, at a very simple level, is a filing cabinet okay? You put your stuff into that filing. A very, very simple analogy for any kind of algorithm, which is basically just code, okay, for retrieving or making decisions or anything like that, okay? It's just code that says, if this, do this. And then it scales and changes and learns depending on its level of sophistication. It just has more inputs. The more sophisticated the algorithm, the bigger the filing cabinet that it can pull from, okay? So initially, the way that they were designed was to make life easier for you, to predict what you want, to make it put less friction in place, so that when you put in the search engine, okay, so let's say you want to Google something, okay, you put the first few words in, and it says, oh, okay, well, you've put these words in before, so you're probably interested in that. So that's like the first result. But also in the past you've done this. This is who you are. So you kind of, you got gender and all these other demographic things about you that they think, well, you're more likely to like this. You're more likely to like, we think we can predict you. Okay. We're just trying to make it just that little bit marginally quicker and more convenient for you so that you can stay, you stay engaged with our platform and use it and all that sort of stuff. I'm talking about very early days, these very simple tools, okay? The predictive text, that sort of stuff, and, Google search. So basically that database got bigger. So that filing cabinet, right, it's basically gone, well, okay, well, here's the stuff that you've got, okay? This is all your information. It's your passport, it's your driver's license, it's every document you've ever made, it's your photos, it's, basic information about you. There's photos of you and your kids and, but that's in there and but you can retrieve that, right? I often joked that I wish that you could just you could do a, spotlight for like physical stuff, which you can now, which is, if you take a photo of it, you can search it, which is cool. But it's, I'm saying like, just think of it that way. It's just retrieval of information. And the way that the algorithms work is that they sort that information based on what's available. Okay. Now, what's made available is not just your data, but your history, other people's history, who you're connected to, who you might be interested in, what you're watching, what you're clicking on, what you engage with, right? All of that sort of stuff. Then as these sort of things evolved, it became aggregate. So big, broad zoom out kind of stuff, statistical trends, probabilities, like a lot of the censorship that you're seeing on social media is based on the likelihood that something is going to happen and then acting accordingly, because you can't do that at scale. A lot of this stuff is basically geared towards preventing that inevitable shift towards the darkness that algorithms provide. And that was my point, which is that algorithms have a tendency to be a mirror of who we are. And that is because of the nature of a black box that we can say what we want to. Okay. So the algorithm, so when we're talking about, I'll talk about this with AI. I want to talk about like that is how you got the woke AI stuff and all that. It's not a conspiracy. It's just that these systems are always having to correct for the darkness in us all. Okay. Because people are going to Google dark shit that they wouldn't say in polite society. They're going to Google the stuff that they don't talk to their family and spouse and stuff about. They're going to ask questions about rashes and embarrassing things. They're going to ask about the dark stuff that, like that's the nature of the search engine. People are going to, the acceptable amount of information that you can get from talking to people is going to be more sanitized than the stuff that you do in private. Okay? That's going to be that bias, okay? And so they have to correct for those biases. Then you've got other biases like capital bias, like this bias, okay, which is the stuff that we're talking about. Male, white, neurotypical, able-bodied, all those things, defaults, okay? So that worldview is imposed because that is an implied default. That is a bias. Okay, so what they need to do is unbias those algorithms. But for the most part, so what these So this is the tension between brand friendliness, okay, being brand friendly, which is the sanitized public version of who humans are, okay, that curated, dare I say, augmented reality, filtered version of society where everyone is, doesn't have impure thoughts and doesn't deviate and isn't kinky and isn't racist and doesn't fucking hate people and isn't a horrible person and isn't depressed and despaired and alienated and all that sort of stuff. The veneer. So think about brand friendly, not so much but in contrast with your true self. So the way that your personal brand collides with who you are as a person, okay? Obviously I'm more authentic online than most others would be, right? But, I try not to curate or have too many filters or, anything like that. Obviously I have LUTs on, but, and lighting, I don't do too much warts and all, but I'm not too worried about curating an image of my life that is not true. But I'm also not going to tell you all my secrets either. I still have a dark side. I'm curious about dark shit and weird shit and all that sort of stuff. Okay. But the algorithms have to be brand friendly and brand safe and not show the warts and all part of stuff, right? I talked about the mummy blogging thing the other day where, those that were creating mummy blogger type, that's why, okay, this is why when in the mummy space and the mummy blogging space and even the mum influencer spaces now, you'll see that a lot of them, and the trad wives and home, the cooking channels, there's a disproportionate number of them are actually Mormons, which is really interesting to me because first of all, they're automatically more brand friendly, but also, their lifestyle is just one that appeals to a sort of safe number of people for brands, right? That's actually a whole other interesting thing. They're more likely to be Mormons, which I find very interesting. So, brands want us to basically be Mormons. Anyway, but it's just, but the algorithm for the most part is fighting between being brand friendly and being the mirror that is actually in front of us of who we are. And that's what I find very interesting because TikTok is just a mirror. And again, that's where all things being equal without interference. Now, the people who are interfering with algorithms are everyone. Okay. So anyone who's got if you're spending $1 million on ads on TikTok a year, you can make a call. You're interfering. You can get stuff taken down. Okay. If you're the IDF, you can fuck with TikTok. Okay. If you've got enough money and enough influence, you can just call your people and they will probably sort you out or help you out or deboost. Okay. There is no evidence at all that TikTok have positively promoted any kind of pro-Palestinian position. It's one of those few things that have broken through organically in spite of pressure to not to suppress that information. What was I saying? But if you don't have that money, you can also put political pressure on people, right? You can also threaten to regulate. Like I've talked about this a lot. The threat to regulate is more powerful than the actual regulation because they're not going to actually try to fucking do anything like put algorithmic transparency in place because you'll see the tight relationships that the intelligence community, law enforcement, government. I mean, I think you'd be really creeped out if there was any level of transparency there around how much the information that we see is curated. And that's why I always just assume that we don't actually have the information about North Korea or China or Russia or anything like that. I am of the view and just assume that we see filtered information. And I think that that's really important, okay? Think of it as all of the information that you've got through a filter, TikTok filter, a beauty filter, as it were. We're not necessarily seeing the unfiltered view because everything is mediated through those algorithms. Those algorithms have biases. You are not getting an accurate representation of reality. Now, the degree to which your reality is being distorted by Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever, that depends. That's a case-by-case thing, right? And also, like there were some studies on beauty filters, for example, and often the interesting thing about beauty filters with some studies that they had was that the closer that the beauty filters looked to your actual face, but improved your little flaws that you saw, but it was still looked like you, the more likely you were to have a negative self-esteem outcome or, negative response to it, because you are more likely to see a attainable or slightly more attainable version. Like I know I tried that creepy TikTok filter that actually just, it slightly Kardashianizes you. It doesn't make you completely like that, but it does give you that slight version of you if you had your teeth done and a little bit of work and a makeup artist and that sort of stuff. And it's like quite creepy and I found that actually creeped me out a lot more than anything that would like distort my face or distort anything in a way that I don't look like myself. And that's because I see something where if I had $100,000, I could attain that look. And I felt like shit. It made me feel like shit. It made me feel, get what I'm saying? So those studies actually show that as well. But I'm saying those things are mixed. So like when people are making generalizations about things like TikTok, a lot of it is that, first of all, they don't like it or they don't understand it, or they've got a lot of it. I've seen that a lot of it is trying to blame. Another thing that I've observed, and this is, I don't know whether there's data around it, but I'd love to see some sort of like longitudinal study or large fucking lost my words, I'm so tired, some sort of study where you saw you compared the parenting style, age of the parents, hang on, I'm just trying to think. So like I'm just trying to design a study on the fly, which is like anyway, but some sort of cross study between the quality of the relationships between the parents before TikTok use, and the amount of I'd love to see some more stuff where I feel like a lot of the parents who have an issue with their kids and tech, it's not root cause stuff. They're blaming the tech for things that run deeper than just the phone. And again, that I think the studies would back me up there, because again, there's that predisposition, the vulnerability already exists, which is that, I know with my kids, I tend to be a bit like, I'm a like ADHD, combination of ADHD and autistic household. We have our sort of gaps, right? And one of my gaps is like paying attention to my kids when they're talking about something that they're spurging out about. Our autisms clash, which is that they're not talking about the thing that I'm interested in, and I go, I'm not interested in that, bye, but that's my children. So I've got to sit there, and it's like, they don't understand how hard it is for me to show interest. And it's like, and because we're all, that's like a spectrum family struggle, but I'm aware of it. And I learned the hard way. That's something that I've had to work on my listening skills to, with my kids. And, again, I'm, divorced and all that sort of stuff. So, we've gone through all of that sort of stuff. And it would be easy to blame the devices for, some sort of breakdown in the relationships. But I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that a lot of this stuff is Gen X blaming tech for a generational, and boomers particularly, for a generational catastrophe. Right, a worldview. There's just again, there's normal things like generational clashes and that sort of stuff. But it's again, I have no real. Again, this is something that someone else could study, and I haven't looked it up, and I'm sure that they probably exist because it's it's a big problem. It's an emerging problem. I imagine there's probably 10 PhDs in progress right now on it, if not several published studies. But pulling that stuff together, meta-analysis was the word that I was trying to think of. It just brain farted out. So some sort of big meta-analysis and try to find some sort of relationship that mashes a cross-disciplinary study where they look at the quality of the relationship and, you know, various other factors. But, you know, we'll wait and see. Like the problem with psychology is that it seems to be going very micro and experimental. It's not doing a lot of, so it'd probably be the sociology departments that are doing these types of things. But yeah, anyway, so it'd be interesting to see that kind of stuff with a large sample size and try to see some trends there. But my instinct is that a lot of this reactionary stuff to technology is scapegoating technology for things that are generational issues, things like the disconnect between boomers who are hoarding houses, greedy, you know, living, dare I say, living too long, outstaying their welcome. A little bit, like, you know, and again, we know this, okay, we, you know, like there's a selfishness to the, you know, people, you know, there's a resentment between Gen Z and older generations because even me and boomers, like I'm, you know, I'm a cusper, and like they went and they got free university education and free healthcare and all of those things. They were able to buy a house cheap, and the second they got in charge of things, they upped everything. You know, we've got student debt. And it's like, well, that's fucked, selfish cunts. You know, they fucked everything up, and I think that's, you know, I think facing that is more difficult than blaming a phone, right? Why don't your kids want to talk to you? Well, maybe because you don't pay attention to them and it's easier to just escape. Like, I get that, right? It's easier to sit on your phone, right? It's like affirming, especially on an algorithm like TikTok's, where it's just affirming you and giving you what you want, right? It's giving you self-esteem, or it's giving you, you know, like again, people will go into harming behaviors too. And then if you look up self-harm or eating disorders or anything like that on TikTok, you'll go into dark parts of TikTok. I mean, I'd argue that Water Talk's probably a bit more sinister, telling you that, like, you know, sugar water is water is probably, you know, a more pervasive kind of problem than a known quantity, which is that, you know, kids that are damaged and traumatized will go and do self-harming behaviors and hurt themselves. And, you know, the medium that they use that is, I'd rather it be, I mean, if all things being equal, if I had to choose between the two, the physical cutting versus the, you know, consumption of harmful content, well, okay, as long as they're not hurting anyone and hurting themselves and just consuming the content, well, and, you know, maybe they might end up being a comedian one day. They might come, you know, it might help them through their depression. Like I'm somebody who I lean into the darkness and then I pull myself out. So when I'm feeling sad or depressed or whatever, I will go and deliberately watch dark shit and I go, oh, it's not that bad. And then I pull myself out. Like, it can be a coping mechanism. So taking one single thing and going and judging it from the outside, you got to go, okay, well, why are they looking at it? Is it hurtful, harmful, helpful? Again, it's just that more sophisticated thinking around it. But it's not just about that TikTok. That TikTok. But the algorithms tend to be a mirror. So, again, and back to political culture, this idea that, yes, the Chinese have legislated and they are able to legislate, right, and able to enforce. Now, I'm not advocating for Chinese-style censorship, but I'm also acutely aware that I am in Australia. I am in a country who probably give me selective information about China and about the firewall and turning them into this authoritarian, censorious, collectivist, like, I am a victim of propaganda. I understand that. I don't know if what I have been told is true about that. Personally, if you look through the Chinese, go from a Chinese perspective and you go, well, if you look at the United States and what the United States do and how they have a tendency to try and do regime changes and coups all over the world, including my own country, where our own country, my country, no one even talks about the coup that happened here, right? It's happening all around the world all the time. I would put a firewall, I'd put a firewall up too, okay? the United States has a tendency to call everyone a dictator that they don't like or that isn't doing, playing along. And you go, okay, well, critical thinking. Does that mean that I am instantly defending China? No, only an idiot would think that. I'm saying it's called critical thinking and not needing to have all of the answers and claiming I have the answers. I'm saying I don't know. I have biases. I have gaps. I live here where I'm fed propaganda as much as anyone else. Okay. Not as much as America, obviously, because we've got, good relationship. We've got a better relationship with China than here. We're kind of like the middle guy. Yes, we're a military base for the United States, effectively, right? But for now, we are a somewhat independent nation. It doesn't look like our Prime Minister has actually said that we're not going to follow suit and try to ban TikTok. So that's good news. Seems to be a uniquely American fucking reaction, which is ban things you don't like rather than actually, again, Band-Aid on the problem rather than actually fixing the problem. It's all about the optics, right? Anyway, So, but it is really, really interesting. There's not a lot of evidence that I can see. Now, again, no one has given me anything really compelling to indicate or prove to any level of even beyond balance of probabilities, okay, let alone beyond a reasonable doubt, but just on probabilities that the Chinese government have any interest in there's no evidence of it, okay. I would assume that propaganda campaigns are occurring, but the United States does them too. They're caught every other week spying on everyone. I mean, the IDF, and if you look at the IDF propaganda on fucking TikTok at the moment, it's absolutely insane. Right, it's absolutely high. I can't believe the brazenness. I watch a lot of that stuff and I go, this is just psychopathy. They used to hide it. It used to be covert. And now it's just like, oh my God, what is wrong with people? But, again, it's just, okay, I understand if you feel you have to be serving in the war, but liking it, loving it. Oh, so who was the joke? It was like, well, we've got to put them somewhere. The wrong ones. We've got to put the psycho, all those people, the kid in your class that they got to go somewhere, and I'd rather them be there and contained and refined with some discipline and put somewhere rather than, working in early childhood or something like that, right? It's like, the military has its role, which is in putting people that those people that are a little off but haven't yet committed a crime, just contain them and put them somewhere and, put little fucking fire starter Johnny over here, right? There's something to be said for that. Sorry, Val, I was joking. But, I haven't seen any evidence. And again, I can't see how it just seems like a big ass moral panic and conspiracy theory to me. Beyond the idea that every government is issuing propaganda, we don't know what's true. They're all doing targeted ad campaigns. They're all doing targeted ad campaigns. They're all doing influencer operations. They're all funded by corporations. Corporations are running ad campaigns. They're all trying to compete for your brain, and that's why your brain is melting. Okay. But it's no one thing. But I mean, the Chinese could just buy the fucking data. It's not like, yeah, okay. Oh my gosh. I can't see why they would do it. I don't see the incentive to do it. Yes, they could run targeted campaigns, but it reeks of the first Red Scare. Read about the first Red Scare around World War One and around the revolution, the Soviet revolution, and all of that sort of stuff around that. And it's just cookie cutter. It is like a complete repeat of history in terms of the messaging, the campaigning, the fear, the response. All of it is just it's just Reds under the bed stuff, and it's basically like a perfect storm of I don't trust them Chinese. I just don't trust them. That's the only argument Is that it's like, what evidence have you got for this? Oh, well, they're spying. Yeah, but all governments are doing that. If you think that espionage isn't going on all day, every day, and that everyone from a SME, you know, your local fucking Coles and Woolworths to like governments aren't using your data to get you to change your mind on stuff and nudging you in various directions, that's not unique. That's not evidence that you can use to single out one company. Why? So why now? Why now? I think it has a lot to do with the organic, like support for Palestinians. I think it has a lot to do with that. Israel is very powerful in the United States. I think it has a lot to do with that and suppressing that. Obviously, it's also, there's an election coming up, so they need to get TikTok in line the same way that they have with Meta and Google and all the others, right? Which is, they need to be in line. And TikTok is kind of a loose, uncontrollable entity, and they want it under control, right? They want to be able to regulate. Now, under control, regulate, there are some things that obviously need regulating, okay? I'm not saying I'm not pro-regulation. I'm just saying that the motivations, the enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend, and interests can align for completely wrong motivations. Like, I don't think the motivations for banning TikTok are correct. I think that they're motivated by suppressing dissent, and they are motivated by market share, America wanting to own the information landscape on the internet, like every American corporation monopolizing information. That's what they want. It's what Disney wants. It's what, it's what Rupert Murdoch wants. It's what Meta wants. It's what Google wants. They want their they want United States owned companies to monopolize and control American hegemony. There's that word again. Okay. But we are, again, you start to get into international relations around, this fight. Again, I don't want to go into theory, it's boring, but we're transitioning from that sort of unipolar Team America World Police setup that has kept things, I would argue, not kept things stable, but gone off the rails, to a sort of multipolar environment where you've got multiple powers that sort of balance each other out. So Val said, that's probably a huge motivator, starts getting into anti-meddling as an extension of national security. Yeah. But when you control it as well. But I mean, it could, even just from a pure money and spending perspective, when you look at the cost of the military budget, it would be cheaper if they controlled all of the social media. They wouldn't have to do as much as they do. They wouldn't have to do any espionage. They owned all of it. People are handing over their shit voluntarily. They're giving everything. If they own everything, if they own all the servers and they have a back door to all of it, they don't need to spend as much on spies and all of this other shit. They don't need to do it because they control it. Okay, so it's not even about power. It might not even be about power. Control can just be about cost. And this is how bureaucrats think. This is banality of evil shit. This is where good people, where they're just going, this is just pure saving. I'm trying to cut budget. Trying to reduce my spend. Okay, how can we do that? Well, we don't have to spend as much on fucking monitoring TikTok if we can control TikTok. It's like, well, it would be. I know that it's more than that, but I'm just saying, if we're being glib and joking about stuff, it can just come down to dollars and cents. And I think that a lot of the time it really does. And also just blind spots and people thinking that they're doing the right thing and incompetence, right? It's so many different things. And this is my main comment on TikTok, which is, as I'm not a news source, you can watch all of the stuff, right? There's no one cause. My main call to action is to just think critically. And think about the things all of the premises that you have to accept with these things. Okay. Also, the fact, well, look at the fucking, look, just use it as use this as a case study in critical media. Looking at the headlines that are like, they're banning TikTok, they're banning TikTok, they're banning TikTok. Well, they're not necessarily banning TikTok. A good faith analysis is that it's passed the House of Representatives. They're threatening TikTok. Okay. And it's like, well, the ban, first of all, the ban will take years once you get through appeals and all those other things. You know, Apple and Google may side with TikTok and say, well, no, because they may have their own axe to grind because they're being broken up with antitrust cases. So they may be going, fuck that. Let's get our revenge. Let's back these guys. Let's refuse. Let's bound together. All of these. And then you go, okay, well, these are all tech monopolies and I hate the amount of power they've got, but I also hate the amount of power they've got. So who are the good guys here? Nobody. But fuck, I agree on the substantive things. It's the same thing with like Elon Musk and his lawsuits. You can agree with some of them and not all of them and think he's a fuckwit, but think he means well and it's like, that's way more interesting than any conspiracy theory. I find conspiracy theories so boring because they're so much less, they're much less interesting than what's actually going on, which is complex and people being fucking cool and weird and good. Like, good people doing bad things is a far more interesting story than evil just being evil. It's way less interesting as Americans need a story, okay? You need a narrative structure. What's more interesting? Evil guy just does evil stuff? Or is it that transformation of character where a good person goes through an experience and is transformed at the end? It's the same thing. I don't understand why conspiracy theories are interesting to people just on that basis, which is that it's way more interesting when people go on a journey and transform. And you go, okay, well, if I go from a baseline that everyone is good and doing their best and trying their best and has blind spots and that, you know, individually people can be good, but in groups they can be fucking horrific and all of those things, that's way more interesting. Requires more reading. Requires you to do more work. Requires you to look at your own darkness and look into the mirror yourself and without a filter, you know, not have to be on a 30-second soundbite app with a filter on, you know, escaping reality and escaping the world around you and curating this reality, this filtered, augmented reality that, you know, you'd have to not do that. You have to see things as they are, but that means seeing yourself as you are and understanding that the algorithm is feeding to you what you're asking of it. That's a lot more that's a lot more than, you know, why am I getting all of this stupid content? I don't know. Are you engaging with stupid content? Are you sharing it? Are you, even if it's to mock it, okay? You get fed what you engage with. You are what you eat, basically, right? Or you eat what you are in this instance, in reverse. Anyway, I'm going to go. It's been an hour and a half. I'm never going to say it'll be a quick one ever again, but I need to piss. Thank you, Val. So following through with that threat comes with a political poison pill. The Great Firewall of China. The Great Firewall of China is the reference model to compare bans like that with. Yes, and it's interesting because like my first reflex with this was, please, by all means, America, ban yourselves from social media. Like if you experience social media as an Australian, Americans just don't get it. They don't understand. They don't understand how exhausting it all is for us. It's like, can't you just be normal? Just be fucking normal. And I know that, like, again, I'm generalizing. Like, there's a lot of very cool, normal, sane Americans, but you know, like that section of like the culture wars people, like on all like this fucking, it's just brainworms 24/7. This dysfunction. It's like, just be fucking normal. Yes, please. Can the GOP ban themselves from like my Twitter feed? Yes, I've blocked you all anyway. Like I can't like, oh my God, can't you be normal? My first reaction was that. And, but it's also like, well, Yeah, I wish they'd just I wish they would just regulate and make it so that all social media, no matter where they're from, I mean, in this instance, they're only talking about adversaries. The bigger problem is that the bigger, broader geopolitical fucking threat and problem that we've got is that they're basically just saber rattling China at the moment. Okay, they're trying to goad China into some shit, and you know, I got nuclear fucking submarines 15 k's from my house. Not happy about it. Okay, and because we would be a target, we're a good target, and I don't think. I mean, China's got no interest. You know, again, trade. Never underestimate the power. As much as powerful as capitalism is at destruction, and as good at it as it is at the destruction, it's also at the end of the day about interests and economic interests. And this trade war that's happening with the United States and China is interesting, but ultimately, like, I do tend to fall in that more sort of interdependency school of thought. I do think that, you know, the global community, should America become a problem, which we're seeing that, I think, with Gaza and Israel. I think Israel is sort of teasing some of those attitudes out and frustrations. I know with our government, they were initially sort of supportive and going, no, we're allies, but then getting increasingly less on board with it and starting to sort of fight back. And one of the things that I've seen here is that our Prime Minister is going to great lengths to assert our independence from the United States. Like, even when asked about this TikTok ban, the first thing that came out of his mouth was, we're not them. And I'm finding that reflex is actually sort of starting to occur a bit more in our, I think a lot of like countries are naively, for better or worse, whether it goes well for them or not remains to be seen. Like, you know, Gough Whitlam, obviously the coup that happened here, Gough Whitlam, you know, one of the biggest reasons why they got rid of him was over Pine Gap and that base, right? All of that stuff around the Vietnam War and like telling America to go fuck themselves, right? All of that sort of stuff. So there was a soft coup there where they sort of engineered. Sorry, the CIA said there's no evidence for that, but there is, and it sounds fucking true. And I was like, well, I just don't trust those Americans. If you can use that argument against China, I just don't trust them. I think we've got a good, compelling case. I just don't trust the CIA. And I can just assume that if there's smoke, there's fire there. But there, you know, obviously John Pilger, who passed away recently, a journalist who, you know, covered this and broke that story like some years ago about the Whitlam coup. But, you know, so for better or worse, people are going, you know, I don't think, you know, if the world, again, the global community says enough, right? Enough people at once. It's like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to go to war with all of us? What are you going to do? You're going to go to war with all of us. And the thing is, America can't do that. But if they own all the social media, it becomes a lot easier and a lot more, you know, like it's an information war now, right? And I think you just need to assume that we're getting propaganda. Like I've had phone calls from people who are just like literally like they contact low-level influencers on YouTube and they start feeding them Chinese propaganda, anti-Chinese propaganda, and they like literally just start like that Uyghur story, right? Again, I don't know, like yes or no, I don't know what information is reliable and who to trust with that, because I just assume that I'm being manipulated with that stuff. But I am disinclined to trust it because I got a phone call from somebody who was basically planting that Uyghur story and trying to ask me to tell and spread that story and introduce them to other content creators that are bigger than me, and trying to get me to share that story about the Uyghurs, right? And that was in 2020. And then I saw that exploding, and I saw that like feed up through Tim Pool and through others and through Murdoch Press, and they sort of plant these stories. And like this guy openly bragged about how he worked in propaganda, right? And how he like worked with DARPA and that sort of stuff. And I was like, that was a bit fucking weird. And like he still sort of floats around, and I don't trust him, right? It tried to get me to be his mouthpiece. And even, you know, they offer like publishing, they offer book deals, and they offer to, you know, like every time I set up a podcast, he's like, oh, I've got some guests for you. And I'm like, well, no, it depends who they are. And this stuff happens all the time. They offer to help you, and then they own you. Like, they give you patrons, and they like throw money at you or offer you opportunities, or, you know, try to find your weak spot, and they socially engineer you into, you know, sharing their bullshit. And I just happen to be immune to that shit. I'm sort of like I don't know. I should have taken it. You know, but you've seen my top tier of Patreon. It's $1.5 million a month. Or get the fuck out of here. US. That's how that's what it costs. Yeah, so anyway, I was going to go, but yeah, it's not about TikTok, and it's not about the TikTok ban. And I think if you're having I want to just emphasize that the evidence is mixed. Okay, on the harms, there's no real evidence that there's data being shared. If the data is being shared, then the solution is not to pick on TikTok. The answer is to regulate and create laws that enforce algorithmic transparency. Of course, there's no interest in doing that, because then if there is that transparency, then obviously, you know, it would make the Twitter files look like fucking nothing, okay? And the Twitter files was already pretty much a nothing burger. If you know anything about tech and you know anything about the space, it's not nothing. It was interesting, but it wasn't new information. Like it's a lot of it was just, oh yeah, well that's stakeholder shit. That's, you know, that's just for solving the problem as best you can. This is not, you know, but I have a feeling that no one's going to like pass laws that are needed, which is that algorithms need to be transparent, because you'll see how much outsized control brands have over what people say, or how much Elon Musk fucks with his own algorithm now, or how much how many takedown requests come from all sides of politics, not just the ones that are, you know, the woke mob, etc., those sorts of things, right? Sorry, what I missed. Hang on, let me just get that chat. Hang on, I've got to fix my studio so I can see things better. Hang on. Trying to get it so that I'm not looking up. I'm trying to get it so the screen's there, but because I want to get a little monitor to go on top here. But anyway, dossiers as a service industry would imply exactly. yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, it's interesting. Like, I wish, you know, I have often do these sort of sliding doors moments where it's like, well, I could either work for the CIA or be a stand-up comedian. Those are sort of my only two options, or a comedy writer, because I see the world too much. I know too many things to be able to like uncritically like operate in this world. So it's lawyer, CIA, or like intelligence, or fucking being a comic, because I just go, fuck it, I reject all of it. The other, you know, the non-intelligence ones are my only options, but it's because I just wouldn't, I can't, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just can't bring myself to do that sort of stuff. It's annoying, but it is, you know, I just want people to just laugh at things and aren't we ridiculous? Everything is just ridiculous. Oh, all right. Camera cut. Okay, it's time for me to go. Time to go. I'm going to go. Phone's doing something. Okay. I got to piss. Have a good one. Become a patron if you want. Sorry this meandered. I wandered off topic, but yeah. Stop reacting to shit! I said so. Bye. Sorry about that. My phone started to blinker out. I'm sorry for that abrupt ending, but I was talking too long anyway. Gotta piss. Doo-doo. This is the wrong graphic, but I'm in the process of doing all of those things. Anyway, have a good one. There's quite a few people watching today. They're probably expecting, probably all the spooks watching. Anyway. Whatever. I'm fucked anyway, who cares? I'll be a spy for $1.5 million US a month. And I'll change all my positions and all my principles for that. I'm more expensive than